morning and happy Tuesday 10 at 10. I am your host, Richard Charpentier. And today like we do every Tuesday, we go through questions that were sent to Bakerpedia. And so let's get started up. So the first question we got today is regarding dough fermentation. Somebody asked if there was a methodology to check the completion of fermentation time in dough product industries when using yeast to the dough. So basically, the question, the way I'm reading it, is whether or not there is a system, a methodology to understand when the fermentation is done. So usually when you're working with yeast is a it's basically a fungi. It starts working into your dough by using the available sugar within your dough and turning it into CO2 and alcohol. So there was at a certain point when everything will be depleted. And if that's the time you're asking, when there is no more food, usually it's going to start smelling very sour, and then the yeast will be depleting. But is there a methodology? None that I'm aware of, whether or not you can, a way to determine, other than maybe measuring the pH, because at a certain point you're going to arrive at the pH will lower, but technically you're fermenting alcohol, and then no longer bread, because you're depleting the available food for the yeast within your product. But good question. So moving on to the next question. How can I increase the shelf life of breads and buns? The recipe I use for the bread is 100% flour, 4% sugar, 1.5% salt, 4% fat, yeast 1.8, 61% water, 3% soy flour, 1% wheat fiber, etc. They give us the recipe. And the bread only stays fresh for 3 to 4 days. Please help me. So if you have a recipe like that and you get only 3 to 4 days, that means, what kind of packaging do you have? What kind of fermentation time do you have? What is your pH and TTA of any pre-ferment, such as sponge, maybe biga, maybe, liquid brew? All of those things are important in order to increase the shelf life of your bread. I'll be more than happy to help you. Again, I always say, if you go to the Bakerpedia page, bakery resources, you can find consultant and you can hire me for an hour, and we can, or less, and we can just see your problems and guide you and point you towards the right process, because shelf life is 50% formulation, 25% process, and 25% packaging. So you got to make sure you got all those components worked, and you understand how to achieve the shelf life. Good question. Next question, again, a shelf life question. I use a combination of calorie and sorbitol acid. What do you think? It's regarding shelf life. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what, a calorie and sorbitol acid, or maybe that's calpro and sorbitol acid. Not sure. There's no question, so I will skip the question, and I'm very sorry that I'm not able to answer your question. Okay, next question. Again, shelf life is becoming popular. How to do long shelf life soft bread? Please tell me how to do long shelf life. Well, as mentioned before, long shelf life is determined by you. And that's what I do as a consultant. I help my customers, with product development, but also with shelf life extension. And how do you extend a product that usually was 1 day? So it's a process, and the process is looking of first of all, what is the shelf life you're targeting? If you go from 1 day, you want 3 days, you want 10 days, you want 30 days, and then you build it upon. And 50% of shelf life extension is formulation. 25% is going to be through your packaging, and 25% is your process. But within your process, it's also the people there. And then the other, among each category, you break it down to process, sanitation program, how clean are you, where are you cooling the breads or cakes, what area is there a potential for contamination, what temperature. So shelf life is not just putting one thing in and saying, okay, I got it. It's an entire thing you have to revamp. It's almost like building a house. All components of shelf life have to work together in order to get good, consistent quality shelf life. So, and I wish I could help, but without zero details, it's like I want to win the lottery, and then everybody does. So, but good question. Next question. We are a small bakery in British Columbia, Canada, and I make mostly sourdough and other artisan breads. The other artisan breads are yeast based with a sponge. I make a big dough, and then the next day I do the same thing after 4 days. So basically, somebody's making a big dough, and they're using portion of the dough until they're gone. But the last loaves I bake, meaning after the 4 days, the crumb is really chewy and wet, and the crust is not crispy. What is happening? So you're over fermenting. Yeast fermentation or sourdough fermentation, it's basically enzymatic reaction, slow process, and you keep on breaking it down. So what's going on is the dough, you have nothing to basically hold the water at that point because the enzymes are cutting it up, and it's going to start becoming very wet because all of it has been worked through. So you no longer have the same texture as you would do on day one or day two, and it's over fermented. So the best thing is to go check your pH if you can, of the doughs over time. And there's a certain point where it's about understanding from a science standpoint of what happens to your the reality of one of your dough, because it's going to change, it's going to become losing some structure. And as yeast cells are producing and also dying, glutathione, which would become a reducing agent, will make the dough tackier and wetter. So it's a combination of having too much enzymatic activity, too much glutathione in your fermentation, and that's why you can't control it. But it's a good process. Maybe shorten it to 3 days and not 4 days. That's what I would do. Right now, we have in case biscuits. How will we get the desired dough if the damaged starch is high, as you are suggesting not to add more water? I mean, what can we do during mixing in reference to damaged starch for biscuits? Well, that's something, damaged starch for biscuits, I'm not familiar. I know in bread, damaged starch has other effect. On biscuits, I don't know. It's something I will have to think through, read what formulation you're using and how to best answer that, and what to change during mixing, because it's the water holding capacity of some of the starches, and then you're creating in fermentation, it creates other issues. As I would love to see what your cracker formula looks like in order to give you a better answer on that. So, and for our last question today, the effect of damaged starch in cake shelf life. I mean, in long shelf life cakes, crumb hardness is stelling. It's another thing is with cakes, because compared to bread, it's fairly contained in terms of the type of formulation you're using. Brioche, lean, etc., a little milk. As cakes, based on, are you using chlorinated flour? Are you using because now you're getting more of the endosperm, you're getting more of a soft wheat, and you're using sugar, you're using eggs, you're using emulsifiers, you're using leavening system, and staling, you're looking at crumb hardness, and staling is dictated mostly by your formula, and we don't really look at starch damage for cakes. And I'm sure there are some amount, but it's not something I've looked into because, again, we're controlling the formulation and the shelf life and the staling through other components other than just starch damage. So hopefully it helps. We covered all your questions. Again, thank you very much for sending your questions to Tuesday 10 at 10. And you have a happy baking day, and we'll see you next week. Take care.